The forest was too quiet. Lyra Vale noticed it the moment her boots left the gravel road and pressed into the narrow dirt path that cut through the trees. Night in Black Hollow usually came alive after sunset. Crickets, wind, the occasional distant bark of someone's restless dog. Even the creak of branches rubbing together. Tonight, the silence felt arranged. She paused without meaning to, fingers tightening slightly around the strap of her bag. The air was cool against her skin, but a thin film of unease slid down her spine anyway. "You're just tired." That's what she told herself. Long day, new town, too many unfamiliar shadows. Still she listened. Nothing. Not the comfortable nothing of an ordinary night. This was the kind that pressed against the ears. The kind that made the back of your neck feel exposed. Lyra exhaled slowly and forced her feet forward. The sooner she got home, the better. Gravel crunched somewhere behind her. She stopped. The sound stopped too. Her heart gave one hard, deliberate thud. "Hello?" she called, her voice steadier than she felt. No answer. Of course there wasn't. Probably a stray animal. Or her imagination finally deciding to act up now that she was alone in a strange town with too many pine trees and not enough streetlights. Still she didn't like it. Lyra started walking again, a little faster this time. The narrow path wound between thick tree trunks, their shadows stretching long and crooked across the ground like they were reaching for something. Or someone. The wind shifted. And with it came a smell. Wet earth, pine. And something else. Something sharp. Something animal. Lyra's steps faltered. Her pulse picked up, not in a burst of panic, but in a slow rising awareness that her body seemed to understand before her mind did. "You're being watched." The thought came uninvited. She swallowed, her fingers curling tighter into her bag strap. "Okay," she muttered under her breath, more to break the silence than anything else. "This is exactly how horror movies start. Congratulations, Lyra." Her attempt at humor fell flat in the empty woods. Another sound. Closer this time. Not gravel. Not branches. A soft, deliberate movement through the underbrush to her left. Lyra turned her head slowly. Too slowly. The trees stared back at her, tall and indifferent. Nothing there. Except. Her breath caught. For just a second, she thought she saw movement between the trunks. Low to the ground, smooth, controlled. Then it was gone. Her heart was definitely racing now. "Okay," she whispered again, but the word came out thinner this time. She started walking faster, not running. Running meant panic. Running meant prey. She wasn't prey. The thought came with surprising sharpness. Lyra frowned slightly, even as her pace quickened. Weird. Very weird. Another step. Another. Then. A growl. Low. Deep. Right behind her. Every muscle in Lyra's body locked. The sound wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It vibrated through the air like something heavy and alive and far too close. Her breath came shallow and careful as she turned. Slowly. Carefully. The world seemed to narrow to the space just beyond the path. Two eyes stared back at her from the darkness. Gold. Not the soft brown of a stray dog. Not the reflective shine of something harmless. Gold and intelligent. And fixed directly on her. Lyra's stomach dropped. "Oh," she breathed. The wolf stepped forward. Massive didn't begin to cover it. Its shoulders rolled with controlled power beneath dark fur that drank in the moonlight. This wasn't an animal that had wandered too close to town. This was a predator that knew exactly where it was. And exactly what it was looking at. Lyra's pulse roared in her ears now, but her feet refused to move. Run. Her brain screamed it. Her body didn't listen. The wolf's head tilted slightly, studying her. Not lunging. Not rushing. It just watched. Like it was confused. Lyra swallowed hard. "Easy," she heard herself say, her voice barely more than air. "Easy I'm not." The wolf moved before she could finish her sentence. Fast. Too fast. 1 second it was standing at the edge of the trees. The next. It was on the path. Charging straight at her. Lyra's breath tore out of her as her body finally unlocked. She stumbled backward, heart slamming violently against her ribs. This was it. This was the moment. Her heel caught on uneven ground. She went down hard, the impact knocking the air from her lungs as the world tilted sharply sideways. The wolf was already mid-leap. Time did something strange then. It slowed. Lyra saw everything with terrifying clarity. The flash of teeth. The ripple of muscle. The pure, lethal certainty of something that had hunted and killed before. Her chest tightened. Not with panic. With something colder. So this is how it ends. The thought came with eerie calm. The wolf came down. And stopped. Not midair. Not dramatically. It landed. Right in front of her. Close enough that Lyra could see the fine texture of its fur. Close enough that she could hear its breathing, deep and controlled and very much alive. But it didn't attack. It just stared. Lyra blinked, her own breath coming uneven now. The wolf's nostrils flared. Once. Twice. Its golden eyes narrowed. And then slowly, the massive creature took one step back. Confusion flickered through Lyra's chest, sharp and disorienting. "What?" she whispered. The wolf let out a low sound. Not a growl. Something almost like a warning. But it wasn't aimed at her. Its ears flattened. Its body tensed. For one strange, suspended second, Lyra had the overwhelming, impossible feeling that the creature in front of her was unsettled. By her. Then the wolf backed away another step. And another. Until the shadows swallowed it whole. The forest fell silent again. Lyra sat there on the cold dirt path, her heart still hammering wildly, her breath uneven in her lungs. She waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing came back. No second attack. No sound of retreating paws. Just that same heavy, unnatural quiet pressing in from all sides. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pushed herself upright. That, she said faintly into the empty woods, was not normal. The words sounded very small out here. Lyra glanced once more toward the trees where the wolf had vanished. A chill slid slowly down her spine. Because one thought, quiet and persistent, refused to leave her alone. It didn't miss. And something deep in her bones whispered a truth she wasn't ready to understand. The wolf hadn't spared her. It had recognized her. By morning, Lyra had almost convinced herself it hadn't been real. Almost. Sunlight poured generously through the wide front windows of Black Hollow's only cafe, warming the polished wood floors and the small round tables scattered across the room. The scent of fresh coffee and cinnamon hung in the air, soft and comforting, the exact opposite of the cold, breathless memory still clinging to the back of her mind. People moved normally here. They laughed. They stirred sugar into their cups. They complained about the weather like the world hadn't tilted sharply off its axis the night before. Lyra sat near the window, fingers curled loosely around a mug she hadn't actually tasted yet. You imagined it. She had repeated that sentence to herself at least 12 times since waking up. Except she hadn't. Her body knew the difference between imagination and the kind of fear that crawled under your skin and stayed there. The bell above the cafe door chimed softly. Lyra didn't look up at first. Until the room changed. It wasn't obvious. No loud reactions. No dramatic gasps. Just a shift. Conversations lowered by half a notch. Shoulders straightened. A few people subtly moved out of the direct path between the door and the counter. Like something heavy had just entered the room. Lyra's fingers stilled around her cup. Slowly, almost against her own will, she lifted her gaze. And saw him. He stood just inside the doorway, broad shoulders filling the frame in a way that made the space feel suddenly smaller. Dark clothes. Dark hair. The kind of stillness that wasn't relaxed, it was controlled, deliberate and dangerous. Something in Lyra's chest tightened before she could stop it. He wasn't looking around the cafe. He was looking at her. Directly. Like he had known exactly where she would be. Lyra swallowed, her pulse beginning to climb in slow, steady beats. She told herself not to look away first. For reasons she couldn't quite explain. The man started walking toward her. Each step was quiet. Measured. Too purposeful to be casual. By the time he reached her table, the soft morning chatter in the cafe had thinned into something more cautious. More aware. He stopped across from her chair. Up close, he was worse. Not in appearance but in presence. There was something about the way he held himself, like coiled steel beneath calm skin. His eyes were a dark, unsettling shade that seemed to miss very little. Lyra lifted her chin slightly. "Can I help you?" His gaze flickered briefly over her face, sharp and assessing, like he was confirming something only he could see. When he spoke, his voice was low, smooth and controlled. "You're new." Not a question. Lyra's brows drew together faintly. That tends to happen when people move to new towns. For a fraction of a second, something almost like amusement touched his eyes. It disappeared just as quickly. "What's your name?" he asked. Still not a request. Lyra hesitated. Something in her instincts, the same ones that had frozen her in the forest, stirred uneasily now. But curiosity won. "Lyra." The moment the name left her mouth, the air between them seemed to sharpen. Not visibly, but she felt it. His jaw flexed once. Interesting. He stepped closer to the table, close enough now that Lyra became sharply aware of the quiet strength in the way he moved. "My name is Kale," he said. A small pause. Then, very deliberately, "Kale Dreven." The name meant nothing to her. The reaction in the room did. Lyra felt it ripple outward, the quiet attention sharpening, the careful listening that people tried to hide behind their coffee cups. Okay. So he was important. Good to know. She leaned back slightly in her chair, folding her arms loosely. "Nice to meet you, Kale Dreven. Is there a reason you're interrogating me before I've had my first sip of coffee?" Again, that brief flicker of something in his eyes. Approval this time. Which, for reasons she did not appreciate, sent a small and very inconvenient flutter through her chest. Kale's gaze dropped briefly to the untouched mug in front of her. Then back to her face. "You were in the forest last night." Lyra went still. Her voice, when it came, was careful. "Black Hollow has a lot of forest." His head tilted slightly, studying her, like he could hear the things she wasn't saying. "Yes," he said quietly. "It does." A beat of silence stretched between them. Then Kale did something unexpected. He reached forward. Not aggressive, but deliberate enough that Lyra's pulse jumped anyway. His fingers stopped just short of her wrist. Close enough that she could feel the faint warmth of his skin. Close enough that the air between them felt charged. The cafe had gone very, very quiet now. "What are you doing?" Lyra asked softly. Kale's eyes didn't leave hers. Confirming something. Before she could pull back, his fingers lightly, almost gently, closed around her wrist. The contact was brief, but it hit like a spark. Lyra's breath caught sharply in her chest. Kale went completely still. For the first time since he'd entered the cafe, his control slipped. Not much. Just enough. His pupils narrowed slightly. His grip tightened by a fraction. And under his breath, so quiet Lyra almost missed it, he murmured. "Impossible." Her stomach dropped. "What's impossible?" she demanded. But Kale was already recovering, his expression smoothing back into that calm, unreadable mask. He released her wrist slowly, carefully, like letting go required more effort than it should have. When he spoke again, his voice carried something new beneath the control. Something heavier. More dangerous. "You should stay close to town, Lyra." Not a suggestion. A warning. Lyra's eyes narrowed. "And why exactly would I take advice from a stranger who just grabbed me in a public cafe?" For the first time, Kale leaned in slightly. Close enough that his voice didn't need to rise above a murmur. Close enough that the words felt meant only for her. "Because," he said quietly, "something in Black Hollow has already taken an interest in you." A chill slid slowly down Lyra's spine. Before she could respond, the cafe door slammed open. Hard. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Kale's head turned instantly, his entire posture sharpening. And for the first time, Lyra saw real tension enter the room. Because whoever had just walked in, Kale did not look pleased to see him. The cafe did not breathe. It held its breath. Lyra felt it in the sudden stillness, in the way every small sound seemed to pull tight and thin. Even the soft hum of the refrigerator behind the counter sounded sharper now, like the room itself was bracing. Kale had gone very, very still beside her. Not frozen. Focused. Dangerously so. Lyra followed his line of sight toward the door. And saw the reason. The man who had just walked in did not move like someone concerned with rules. Or quiet entrances. Or careful first impressions. He leaned casually against the doorframe for half a second too long, like he was taking in the room on purpose, fully aware of the ripple he'd just caused. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Dark hair that looked like it had never once obeyed a comb. And eyes. Sharp. Bright. Very, very alive. Unlike Cale's controlled stillness, this man carried motion even when he wasn't moving. Energy rolled off him in quiet waves, restless and warm and just a little dangerous. Lyra felt it immediately. The shift. Like someone had cracked open a window in a room that had been sealed too tight. The stranger's gaze swept lazily across the cafe. Then stopped. Right on her. A slow grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Well," he drawled, voice warm and edged with something that sounded suspiciously like trouble, "this is new." Cale's voice beside her dropped several degrees. "You're late." The newcomer's eyes flicked to him briefly, completely unbothered. "Wasn't aware I had a schedule to keep, Driven." The name landed differently this time. Not cautious. Not respectful. Challenging. Lyra's pulse picked up, sharp and curious. Oh, this was definitely something. The man pushed away from the door and started toward them, his stride loose and unhurried. Where Cale's presence pressed down on a room, this one moved through it like he owned the air. People shifted subtly out of his path. But not in fear. In awareness. He stopped at Lyra's table, close enough now that she could see the faint scar cutting through one of his eyebrows, the kind of mark that came from someone who had learned lessons the hard way and lived to smirk about it. His gaze settled fully on her. And stayed there. Open. Interested. Unapologetically curious. "Well," he said again, softer this time, like he was testing the sound of the moment, "you must be Lyra." Her brows lifted. "And you must be someone who enjoys dramatic entrances." That grin widened. "Only when they're worth it." The words shouldn't have landed the way they did. But something in Lyra's chest gave a small traitorous flutter anyway. Cale shifted beside her. It was subtle. Most people probably wouldn't have noticed. Lyra did. The air cooled again, just slightly. "State your business, Rowan," Cale said, voice smooth but carrying a warning thread beneath it. Rowan. The name clicked into place. Rowan's attention flicked back to Cale briefly, the easy warmth in his expression sharpening just a touch. "Relax," he said lightly. "If I'd come looking for a fight, you'd know." Something dangerous flickered behind Cale's eyes. Gone in a blink. Lyra leaned back slowly in her chair, folding her arms loosely as she studied the two men like pieces on a chessboard she hadn't agreed to play. "So," she said, tone dry but edged with curiosity, "should I be concerned that you both know my name, or is this just how Black Hollow welcomes new residents?" Rowan's gaze snapped back to her instantly. Bright again. Engaged. "Fair question," he admitted. Then, without asking, he pulled out the chair across from her and sat. Casual. Like Cale's silent disapproval didn't exist. Like the tension humming across the table was just background noise. Lyra's pulse ticked up another notch. Because the energy between the two men had changed. Cale was pressure. Rowan was spark. And right now, those two things were colliding directly across her table. Rowan leaned his forearms lightly against the edge of the table, his focus fully on her now. "Short version," he said. "This town doesn't get many surprises." His eyes flicked briefly to Cale. Then back to her. "And you, Lyra Vale, are shaping up to be a very interesting one." Her stomach did a small, unwelcome dip. "Interesting how?" She opened her mouth to ask. But Cale spoke first. "Sharp. Controlled. That will be enough." Rowan didn't even look at him this time. Instead, his gaze softened slightly as it stayed on Lyra, like he was reading something in her expression she hadn't meant to show. "You okay?" he asked quietly. The question landed differently than anything else that had been said in the last 5 minutes. Not probing. Just checking. Lyra blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. "I'm fine," she said automatically. Rowan's mouth twitched. Like he didn't quite believe her. "Right," he murmured. "You look very fine." Heat crept faintly up Lyra's neck before she could stop it. Annoying. Very annoying. Kale's voice cut in again, colder now. You're overstepping. Finally, Rowan turned his head. And for the first time since he'd entered the cafe, the easy warmth in his expression cooled. Not gone, but sharpened. Am I? He said softly. The space between the two men tightened. Lyra felt it in her bones, the subtle shift of something ancient and territorial brushing just beneath the surface. Her pulse thudded once, hard. This wasn't just tension. This was a line being drawn. Rowan leaned back slowly in his chair, but his eyes never left Kale's. You don't get to call territory that hasn't answered you yet, he said. The words were quiet, but they landed heavy. Lyra's breath caught. Answered? Kale's jaw flexed once. A small movement. But it carried weight. When he spoke, his voice was very calm. The dangerous kind of calm. She is not your concern. Rowan's gaze slid back to Lyra, slow and deliberate. Something almost thoughtful moved through his expression. Funny, he said lightly. A beat. Then, softer. She doesn't feel like she belongs to anyone yet. The words settled into the air between them. Charged. Provocative. Lyra's heart kicked sharply against her ribs. Because beneath the tension, beneath the rivalry beginning to take shape, something else had just sparked. Something electric. And for the first time since arriving in Black Hollow, Lyra had the quiet, unsettling feeling that whatever had started in the forest last night was only just beginning. Black Hollow was a town that noticed things. It just pretended not to. By the third day, Lyra could feel it. Not in anything obvious. No one whispered when she passed. No one pointed. The barista still smiled when handing over her coffee, and the elderly woman at the corner store still made polite conversation about the weather. On the surface, everything was normal. But the spaces between moments had started to feel off. Like the town was holding its breath around her. Lyra stepped out of the small grocery store just after noon, the bell above the door giving its usual cheerful chime. Sunlight spilled across the street, warm and golden, and for a second she almost convinced herself the tight feeling in her chest was just leftover nerves from the cafe incident. Almost. She adjusted the paper bag in her arms and started down the sidewalk. Halfway to the corner, she noticed the dog. It stood across the street beside a rusted mailbox, medium-sized sandy fur, the kind of town no one paid much attention to. Its head was lifted slightly, ears forward, body very still. Watching her. Lyra slowed without meaning to. The dog didn't bark. Didn't growl. It just stared. A thin thread of unease slipped down her spine. Okay, she murmured under her breath, trying for lightness she didn't quite feel. I promise I'm not that interesting. The dog's nose twitched. Once. Twice. Then something strange happened. Its ears flattened. Its body shifted backward, slow, careful like it wasn't sure whether to run or stay. Lyra's steps faltered. Hey, she said softly, more instinct than intention. It's okay. The dog took one more step back. Then another. And then with a quiet whine that barely carried across the street, it turned and trotted quickly around the corner. Gone. Lyra stood there for a long moment, the grocery bag suddenly feeling heavier in her arms. That's new, she muttered. But the unease didn't fade. If anything, it settled deeper under her skin. By late afternoon, the feeling hadn't left her. If anything, it had sharpened. The edge of town gave way quickly to trees, thick, towering pines that seemed to lean just a little too close together. Lyra had told herself she needed fresh air. Needed movement. Needed something to shake off the strange weight pressing against her thoughts. So far, it wasn't working. The narrow trail ahead of her curved gently through the woods, quiet except for the soft crunch of leaves beneath her boots. Too quiet. Again. Lyra exhaled slowly, forcing her shoulders to loosen. You are not doing this again, she told herself under her breath. But even as the words left her mouth, the back of her neck prickled. Watched. The sensation was faint. But unmistakable. She kept walking. Didn't turn around. Didn't speed up. Some instinct? The same stubborn one that had kept her from bolting in the forest that first night held her steady. A branch snapped somewhere off to her right. Lyra stopped. Slowly, she turned her head. The trees stood silent and tall, their shadows stretching long across the forest floor. For a moment, she saw nothing. Then, movement. Low. Between the trunks. Her breath caught. A wolf stood partially concealed in the brush. Not as massive as the one from the other night. But definitely not a dog. Gray fur. Lean build. Sharp, intelligent eyes fixed directly on her. Lyra's pulse jumped. The wolf didn't move closer. Didn't bare its teeth. It just watched. The same way the dog had. The same way the silence had. Lyra swallowed carefully. "Okay," she said softly, her voice more controlled than she felt. "I'm starting to think this town has a staring problem." The wolf's ears twitched. Its nose lifted slightly, scenting the air. Then its entire posture changed. Not aggressive. Not fearful exactly. Uneasy. The animal shifted its weight backward, muscles tightening beneath its coat. For one strange second, Lyra had the distinct, unsettling impression that the wolf looked uncertain of her. A chill slid slowly down her spine. "What," she whispered faintly, "is your deal?" The wolf huffed once, a soft, almost frustrated sound, and took a step back. Then another. And then it turned and slipped soundlessly into the trees. Gone. Just like the dog. Just like the first wolf. Lyra stood rooted to the trail, her heartbeat slow but heavy in her chest. That was not normal. Not even a little. Dusk settled early in Black Hollow. By the time Lyra reached the edge of town again, the sky had begun to dim into soft shades of blue and gray. Street lamps flickered to life one by one, casting warm pools of light across the sidewalks. She had just turned onto the main road when she felt it again. That quiet, deliberate attention. Lyra's steps slowed. Across the street, 3 older men stood outside the town hall, their conversation low and quiet. Except, they weren't talking anymore. They were watching her. Not openly. Not rudely. But carefully. Lyra's fingers tightened slightly around the strap of her bag. One of the men, tall, silver-haired, posture straight despite his age, tilted his head just slightly, like he was studying a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Their eyes met for half a second. The man's expression didn't change. But something in his gaze sharpened. Assessing. Measuring. Then slowly, he looked away. The other 2 followed a beat later, their conversation resuming in low murmurs. Like nothing had happened. Lyra's stomach dropped. Because something had. She could feel it. In the way the air pressed too close. In the way the animals kept backing away. In the way people in this town seemed just a little too aware of her presence. Lyra exhaled slowly and started walking again, her step steady even as unease curled tighter in her chest. Behind her, unseen in the lengthening shadows near the tree line, a pair of golden eyes watched her walk away. Unblinking. And deeply, deeply uncertain. The first sign was the headache. It came quietly. Not sharp. Not sudden. Just a slow, steady pressure building behind Lyra's eyes as she stood at the small sink in her apartment, staring down at the glass of water in her hand like it might explain something. She hadn't slept well. Again. The clock on the microwave blinked 11:42 p.m. in soft green numbers. Too late for coffee. Too early to call it morning. The kind of hour where the world felt thin around the edges. Lyra lifted the glass and took a careful sip. The water tasted fine. Normal. So why did everything feel slightly out of place? She set the glass down slowly and pressed her fingers to her temple, massaging the dull ache blooming there. "Okay," she murmured softly. "Dehydration. Stress. Newtown syndrome. Logical. Reasonable. Except the pressure didn't ease. If anything, it deepened, not painful exactly. Just present, like something gently knocking from the inside of her skull, patient and persistent. Lyra exhaled slowly through her nose and turned away from the sink. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Even for this hour. She crossed the small living space and paused near the window, drawn there by something she couldn't quite name. Outside, Black Hollow lay still under the soft wash of moonlight. The streets were empty. The trees at the edge of town stood tall and unmoving, their shadows stretching long across the ground. The moon hung low tonight. Full. Bright enough to paint the world in silver. Lyra's breath slowed without her permission. Something about the light felt wrong. Not dangerous. Not yet. Just unfamiliar in a way that made the fine hairs along her arms rise slowly to attention. Her fingers curled lightly against the edge of the windowsill. Weird, she whispered. The headache pulsed once. Harder this time. Lyra winced. Okay. That was new. She pushed away from the window and reached blindly for the bottle of painkillers on the counter. 2 tablets. A swallow of water. She leaned back against the cool surface of the fridge and waited. 30 seconds. A minute. The pressure didn't leave. Instead, it moved. Lyra's breath caught. The sensation slid slowly downward, like cold fingers tracing the inside of her spine. Her hand dropped slowly from her temple. Nope, she said faintly. Her body did not agree. A shiver rolled through her shoulders, not from cold. From something deeper. Something that made her muscles tighten and release in slow, uneven waves. Lyra straightened carefully. Okay, she tried again, voice quieter now. Okay, that's... The air shifted. Not in the room. Inside her. Her breath hitched. For one strange, suspended second, the world seemed to sharpen around the edges. The hum of the refrigerator grew louder. The distant creak of the building settling pressed closer to her ears. Even the soft whisper of wind outside the window suddenly sounded clearer. Lyra went very still. Her pulse began to climb. Steady. Heavy. Like her body was preparing for something her mind hadn't caught up to yet. That's not funny, she whispered to the empty apartment. Another pulse of pressure slid through her skull. This time, it hurt. Lyra sucked in a sharp breath, her fingers bracing hard against the counter as the sensation spiked, not outward, but inward, like something tightening beneath her skin. Her vision blurred for half a second, then snapped back into focus. Every shadow in the room seemed darker, every edge more defined. Lyra swallowed carefully. Her throat felt tight, dry. She pushed herself upright and stumbled the short distance back to the window, drawn again by something she could not explain. Outside, the moon had climbed higher, brighter, watching. Her reflection in the glass looked pale, drawn, uneasy. Lyra leaned closer, just to check, just to reassure herself that everything was okay. Her breath stopped. For a fraction of a second, her pupils flickered. Not wide, not glowing, just wrong. Like her eyes couldn't quite decide what they were supposed to be. Lyra jerked back from the glass, heart slamming once, hard against her ribs. No, she breathed. The headache surged. Her fingers curled instinctively against her side as another shiver rolled through her body, deeper this time, brushing dangerously close to pain. But still not quite crossing the line. Not yet. Her phone buzzed suddenly on the counter behind her. The sharp sound made her flinch. Lyra turned too quickly, breath uneven, and grabbed the device with fingers that didn't feel entirely steady. Unknown number. Of course. Because apparently tonight was committed to being strange. She hesitated, then answered. Hello. For a second, there was only silence on the other end. Then, Lyra. Cale. Her spine went rigid. His voice was low, controlled. But something underneath it was tighter than she remembered. You need to stay inside tonight, he said quietly. Not hello. Not how are you. Stay inside. Lyra's brows pulled together despite the lingering pressure behind her eyes. Wow. You really know how to open a conversation. A pause. Then more firmly. I'm not joking. Something in his tone slipped past her irritation and settled uneasily in her chest. Lyra moved slowly back toward the window despite herself. You want to explain why? Another pause. Longer this time. When Cale spoke again, his voice had dropped even lower. Because the moon is wrong tonight. A cold chill slid down her spine. Lyra's gaze lifted slowly toward the silver light spilling through the glass. Define wrong, she said softly. On the other end of the line, Cale exhaled slowly. You'll start feeling it, he said. Lyra's fingers tightened slightly around the phone. Too late. Her pulse thudded heavily in her ears. Because she already had. The moon did not let her sleep. Lyra lay on her back long after midnight, eyes open to the dark ceiling, the thin silver light from the window stretched across the floor like something alive and watching. The pressure behind her eyes had dulled from sharp to heavy, but it had not left. It pulsed slowly through her body, patient as a second heartbeat. By morning, she was tired in a way sleep would not fix. Which was how she found herself standing outside the edge of town again. She hadn't meant to come here. That was the unsettling part. 1 minute she had been walking with no real destination, hands buried in her jacket pockets, telling herself she just needed air. The next minute the trees were in front of her, tall and waiting, the narrow path leading inward like an invitation she did not remember accepting. Lyra exhaled slowly. "You are officially developing concerning habits," she muttered. The wind moved softly through the branches above. No answer. Still she stepped forward. The forest greeted her the same way it always had. Quiet. Watchful. Wrong in a way she could not yet explain. She hadn't gone more than 20 steps down the path when she felt it. Not the animals this time. Not the distant, uneasy attention. Something closer. Familiar. Lyra slowed. "You're not very subtle," she said without turning. Silence. "You weren't supposed to notice that fast." Rowan's voice slipped easily through the trees behind her, warm and threaded with quiet amusement. Lyra closed her eyes briefly. Of course it was him. She turned slowly. Rowan leaned casually against the trunk of a nearby pine like he had been there all morning, arms loosely crossed, expression easy. "Too easy. You've been following me," she said. Not accusing. Just stating. His mouth twitched. Following is such an aggressive word. Her brows lifted. "Oh? What's the polite version?" Rowan pushed off the tree and stepped closer, boots quiet against the forest floor. "Keeping an eye on things." Lyra folded her arms loosely, though her pulse had already started that now familiar climb. "Things," she repeated dryly. "That would be me, I assume." His gaze held hers, steady and unapologetic. "Yeah," he said softly. "That would be you." The honesty of it caught her slightly off balance. No deflection. No clever dodge. Just plain truth. Lyra shifted her weight, irritation, and something more complicated tangling in her chest. "You realize most people would find that unsettling." Rowan's expression softened, not playful now. Something quieter. "Most people in this town aren't you." The words landed gently. And somehow hit harder because of it. Lyra opened her mouth to respond. The air changed immediately. Rowan felt it too. His posture sharpened a fraction of a second before Lyra turned her head. Cale stood at the edge of the tree line. Still. Silent. The temperature in the forest seemed to drop 3 degrees. Lyra resisted the sudden urge to sigh. "Well," she muttered, "this is becoming a theme." Rowan didn't look away from Cale, but the easy warmth had cooled from his expression. "You're early," Rowan said. Cale's gaze flicked briefly to Lyra, quick, assessing before returning to Rowan. "I was not aware I needed an appointment." Lyra rubbed lightly at her temple. "Do you two rehearse these lines?" she asked, "or does the tension just come naturally?" Rowan's mouth curved faintly. Cale did not look amused. He stepped forward slowly, measured, that same controlled presence pressing quietly into the space between them. "Lyra," Cale said, his voice lower than usual. There was something different in it today. Not just command. Concern. Real enough that Lyra felt it in her chest before she could stop herself. "You should not be out here alone," he continued. Lyra tilted her head. "Funny. I'm starting to hear that a lot lately." Cale's jaw tightened slightly. "You're not listening." "And you're not explaining," she shot back, more sharply than she intended. The words hung there. For a moment, Cale's carefully controlled expression slipped. Just a fraction. Something like frustration or worry moved through his eyes before he smoothed it away again. "I am trying to keep you safe," he said quietly. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Lyra's chest tightened unexpectedly. Before she could respond, Rowan's voice cut in, softer but edged. "Safe from what, exactly?" Cale's gaze snapped back to him. "Cold. From things you are not equipped to handle." Rowan's expression didn't change much. But Lyra saw the subtle shift, the way his shoulders squared just slightly, the way his voice lost some of its easy warmth. "You don't get to decide what she can handle." The forest seemed to lean closer. Lyra's pulse kicked up. There it was again. That invisible line between them. Drawing tighter. She exhaled slowly. Okay. Before this turns into whatever this is about to turn into, maybe someone would like to explain why everyone in this town is acting like I accidentally wandered into the wrong story. Silence answered her. Not empty. Heavy. Cale looked at her. Really looked this time. And something in his expression shifted, although not soft but less guarded than before. You feel it, don't you? He said quietly. Lyra's breath hitched. Just slightly. She hated that he noticed. Feel what? She asked carefully. Cale held her gaze. The moon. The words landed low and certain. A chill moved through her. Before she could stop herself, her fingers curled slightly at her sides. Rowan noticed. Of course he did. His voice softened when he spoke again. You don't have to answer him, Rowan said gently. Lyra's eyes flicked to him. And for the first time since she'd met him, the teasing edge was gone completely. What remained was something quieter. Protective. But not possessive. The difference mattered. More than she expected. Her chest tightened in a way she did not appreciate. This was getting complicated. Fast. Lyra dragged a hand lightly through her hair and stepped back half a pace, putting just a little space between herself and both of them. Okay, she said slowly. Here's where I'm at. Wolves are acting weird around me. The town feels like it knows something I don't. And both of you keep showing up exactly where I am. She looked between them. Sharp. Steady. So either I have incredibly bad luck, she finished, or one of you is finally going to start talking. The silence that followed was thin and stretched. Rowan and Cale exchanged a look. Not friendly. Not neutral. Complicated. And for the first time since this strange, unsettling chain of events had begun, Lyra had the distinct sinking feeling that whatever answer she was about to get was only going to make things worse. The walls of Black Hollow were built on old stories. But some stories were buried deeper than others. Lyra hadn't meant to wander into the town library that afternoon. In fact, she hadn't meant to wander into much of anything lately. The events of the last few days felt like they had piled on top of each other, clashing, colliding, never quite giving her a chance to breathe. Her mind ached, her heart raced, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the universe was pressing a hand firmly against her chest, urging her to understand something she wasn't yet ready to grasp. But here she was. The air in the library was thick with dust, the kind that clung to your skin, your lungs. It smelled old, like the kind of place that had been forgotten until it was needed, and now it only existed to wait. Lyra had already walked through the entire first floor, scanning the shelves for anything useful. The silence of the place had set her on edge though, and each step deeper into the stacks only seemed to carry more weight. Until she found it. The book was ancient, its spine cracked and fragile, its cover too faded to make out the title. It rested on a shelf tucked into the farthest corner, as though it had been intentionally hidden. Something inside Lyra shifted. Her fingers brushed against the spine, and the sudden sense of rightness of something calling to herb made her freeze for a second too long. Against her better judgment, she pulled the book free. She should have left. She knew she should have left. But curiosity, like a low-burning flame, refused to let her turn away. There was something pulling her forward. Something in the stillness of the library, in the pages she had yet to turn, that made her feel like the history of this place had been waiting for her. The first page was blank. The second was too. It wasn't until she reached the third that the words began to appear, fading ink that seemed to have lost some of its strength over the years, as though it had been speaking in whispers for centuries. The first curse. Lyra's pulse quickened as she traced the words. In the beginning, there was blood. It should have meant nothing. It didn't. The words seemed to pulse as her fingers moved over them, the ink bleeding into her skin in a way that made her feel like she was connected to something ancient. Something buried. Her breath caught as the next sentence appeared. And from blood came the wolves. The room seemed to shift around her. Suddenly, the air felt thinner. Like she was no longer alone. Her pulse kicked up, but she couldn't stop reading. But the wolves were not born of nature. The sentence stretched out on the page, lingering. Not born of nature. Lyra felt a strange prickling on the back of her neck as she read on. The wolves were forged by an ancient curse, wrought by those who sought to control the moon and its power. The first of them, a woman, no more than a girl, bore the blood of the gods, a blood that could bind the heavens to the earth. It was her blood that would give birth to the first wolf, and with it, a curse that would never end. Lyra's fingers faltered on the page, and the breath she hadn't realized she was holding rushed out of her in a slow, uneasy exhale. Her blood? She turned the page. The next words burned through her like a slow, creeping fever. But in the binding of heaven and earth, the first sacrifice was made. The girl's blood, no longer pure, was tainted by the earth's greed. The curse that followed her was no accident. It was born of the world's hunger. And it would take everything. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. This was wrong. This wasn't what she had expected to find. There was a weight behind these words. They weren't simply a story. They were truths, truths long buried beneath the weight of centuries. She flipped another page, and the words were clearer now, faster, almost urgent. The wolves, bound by the blood of the girl, the gods will tied to their bones became predators. Monsters born of the curse. But they were not the true curse. The curse lay within the girl's blood, which would never stop calling the wolves to it, to her, to the one who bore the mark. Lyra's breath hitched. The wolves. The first wolf. It was her. She wasn't sure when the thought fully landed, but it exploded in her chest with an intensity that stole the air from her lungs. The girl, the blood. Her blood. She turned the page again. And when the wolves sought the girl, her blood calling them, they would find the curse was not merely a creation of the gods, but the first bond forged in the fires of betrayal. The page cracked beneath her fingers. Her stomach churned. This couldn't be about her. She was just a girl from a small town. She wasn't some ancient being bound to a curse that had shaped the very foundation of werewolf history. Wasn't she? She read on, but the words blurred at the edges. The bloodline that began with the girl would never die. It would only sleep, hidden beneath layers of time and false history. It would return. And when it did, the wolves would seek it. Lyra closed her eyes, the room spinning. She tried to swallow, but her throat was too tight. Her thoughts raced, colliding with one another, tumbling into confusion and horror. The wolves, the curse, the blood. She had felt something strange her entire life. Something beneath the surface. But she never once thought it could mean this. The girl in the story. The one with the blood of the gods. She wasn't just a myth. She was her. Lyra set the book down carefully, her hands trembling. And when she looked up, she wasn't alone. Cale was standing in the doorway, his posture rigid, his eyes flickering over her with an intensity that took her breath away. "You shouldn't have found that," he said quietly. The words felt like a warning. The kind of warning only truth could carry. Lyra's pulse pounded in her ears, her mind scrambling to catch up. She opened her mouth, but the words caught in her throat. She began, but the sound was barely a whisper. "You knew." Cale's jaw tightened, his expression strained. "I didn't want you to know. Not yet." Lyra stared at him, her body tense, a new understanding dawning in the quiet gap between them. But it wasn't just the book that had changed the air around them. It was the truth she had just discovered. And the way Cale's eyes flickered with something close to fear as he took a step toward her. "Tell me everything," Lyra demanded, her voice shaking but stronger than she felt. "Now." And for the first time, Cale didn't respond with control. For the first time, he was the one who looked like he had just found something that would tear him apart. The quiet was suffocating. Lyra hadn't meant to come back here. But the pull was undeniable. The moon hung low in the sky again, bright and unsettling, spilling its pale light across the town square, turning the cobblestones into something cold and unfamiliar. Every street lamp flickered weakly as she walked, as if even they were too tired to shine. Her footsteps echoed louder than she wanted, bouncing off the buildings around her. She didn't look up to see who might be watching. She already knew. It was always the same. It had to be. And still, the weight in her chest didn't lift. She had heard the stories. She had felt the pressure. The blood. The wolves. The curse. And through it all, she had believed that someone would be honest with her. That they would finally tell her the truth. But no one had. Not Cale, not Rowan. Not even herself. Lyra turned the corner. Her heart stopped. Cale was standing in the middle of the street, his back straight, his posture almost military in its precision. But it wasn't the sight of him that stopped her. It was the quiet, eerie feeling that settled over her the moment her eyes found him. The way the air felt colder, the shadows stretching toward him like they were made of something darker than night. He wasn't alone. Rowan stood beside him. They didn't look at her. Didn't even acknowledge her presence. They stood like two immovable forces, side by side, their attention focused on something she couldn't see, something beyond the shadows of the square. Lyra's pulse quickened. She didn't know why. She had known they were connected. She had known it was inevitable that the two men would stand together one day, aligned in ways that would make the world spin on its axis. But this felt different. Her chest tightened. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Not a word. Only the soft sounds of the night around them. But there was an edge to it. An invisible weight pressing in on her. On them, on everything. Finally, Cale broke the silence, his voice low, measured. Lyra. His eyes found hers, and for the first time, there was nothing controlled in his gaze. No distance. No masks. Just truth. Raw and open. Cale, her voice faltered. What is this? What are you? Before she could finish the sentence, Rowan stepped forward, his gaze flicking to her for the first time since he'd entered the street. His lips quirked, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. She deserves the truth, Rowan said, his voice too smooth, too calm. Doesn't she, Cale? Cale's jaw tightened, and for the first time since she had met him, Lyra saw a flicker of hesitation. Rowan's smile didn't falter. Don't play with her, Cale, Rowan continued, his tone almost playful. But there was nothing light about it. She already knows. Lyra's heart slammed against her ribs. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling despite herself. She took a small step back, eyes flicking between the two of them. Tell her, Cale, Rowan pressed, stepping closer now, almost too close. It's time. Cale didn't move. Didn't speak. But Lyra could see it in the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his hands clenched at his sides. And for the first time, she understood. She understood the lie. Cale's voice cracked as if the weight of the words had been pressing on him for longer than she'd realized. I never wanted to tell you. Her breath caught. What? Her voice dropped to a whisper. What do you mean? What are you saying? Rowan glanced at Cale, his gaze sharp and cold, before returning to Lyra, his lips still curled with that half-smile. It's not just Cale's fault, he said, his voice suddenly too light. Too indifferent. I knew about you. From the beginning. Lyra staggered back, her chest tightening painfully, a sudden cold sweat breaking out across her skin. From the beginning, she whispered. You both knew? You knew who I was. Cale's lips parted, but no sound came. Not who you are, Rowan answered, his words clipped. We knew who you would be. We've known for a long time. Lyra's knees nearly gave out beneath her. The weight of the words sank in like stones. He had known exactly who she was, what she was tied to, and what that would mean. Rowan's voice broke through the haze of her shock. You were never meant to be a mate, Lyra. Not to either of us. No, Lyra whispered, shaking her head slowly. No. That's not possible. Cale's eyes flickered with something she couldn't place. Regret? Shame? It was gone too quickly for her to make sense of it. You were meant to be a sacrifice, Cale said, his voice quieter, but the words cut deep. You are the key. The one who can break everything. Her breath caught, her chest tightening painfully around her lungs. Rowan stepped closer. But breaking it would mean more than either of us could have ever imagined, Lyra. And neither of us could stop what was coming. His voice softened, like he was trying to make it softer, but the words still sliced through her. No one could, Cale finished, his voice strained. The silence between them felt like the world shattering, piece by piece. Tell her the rest, Cale, Rowan said, his eyes hard. She deserves to know. Cale finally looked at her. His gaze was raw now, shattered, and in that look, she saw it all. The truth. Her breath hitched painfully in her throat. You were born from blood, Cale said, his voice low, and there was no hiding the sorrow there now. And that blood, it doesn't just belong to the gods. It belongs to the wolves. Lyra's knees buckled beneath her, but Rowan was there to catch her. Cale's eyes never left hers. And in that look, Lyra saw everything. The lies. The betrayal. Her world trembled. And the pieces fell. The air was heavier tonight. It pressed in on Lyra, thick with a weight that felt both familiar and wrong, like something she had been carrying for years without knowing it. The moon was full, shining, gleaming, like a watchful eye, and its light spilled across Black Hollow with an intensity that felt almost cruel. The streets were empty now, the usual hum of late-night life silenced under the quiet dominance of the moon's glow. And yet, the world wasn't silent. Lyra stood at the edge of town, her breath shallow as she stared up at the heavens. She could feel it now, in the way her body had begun to move without her permission, the way her heartbeat thrummed just a little too loudly. The pull of the moon. The pull of something far darker and deeper than the world she had known. The pull of something that had always been inside her. She had spent so much time running from it. From them. And now there was no more running. The sound of footsteps broke through her thoughts. Lyra didn't turn. She didn't need to. The air around her shifted again, Cale, standing just behind her. She hadn't heard him approach. But of course, she hadn't. Cale never made a sound. Lyra, he said quietly, his voice softer than it had been in days. But even in the softness, there was an edge of something sharp. Something she could feel pressing against her chest, tugging at her heart. She didn't look at him. Didn't speak. She couldn't. Not yet. His voice came again, but this time, there was something almost fragile beneath it. You feel it, don't you? The question wasn't a question. It was a fact. She felt the pull. She couldn't ignore it any longer. The blood moon. Her blood. Lyra's hand instinctively moved to her chest, as though she could stop the tremor of her heartbeat with just a thought. Everything changes tonight, Cale continued. His words hung between them like a promise, a curse. Still, she didn't turn. She didn't want to. She couldn't face him yet. Not after everything. I didn't ask for this, she said quietly, her voice almost lost in the stillness of the night. Cale didn't respond immediately. When he did, there was a heavy pause, a beat where the distance between them seemed to stretch further than it ever had. You didn't have to, he said, his voice cracking slightly as if the weight of the words was almost too much for him to bear. But it was never about asking, Lyra. It was always about fate. At that, Lyra did turn. She couldn't help it. The words cut deeper than she expected, slicing through the fragile shell of what little control she had left. Cale's face was drawn, tired. His eyes were stormy, darkened with something unreadable. But there was more. There was a flicker of something like regret, something unsaid and raw beneath the surface. He was trying to protect her, but she wasn't sure from what anymore. You told me I was safe, she whispered, taking a step toward him. But that was a lie. Cale flinched. His jaw clenched, but he didn't step back. He didn't look away. It wasn't a lie, he said, but his voice was thick with something Lyra couldn't place. It was a promise. I thought he stopped himself, the words cutting off as if he had said too much. Lyra felt a flicker of something between them then. Not hate, but something that twisted the air, heavy and thick. Her heart was pounding now, her breath shallow as she looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time in what felt like forever. You thought what? She demanded. His eyes softened in a way that made her stomach tighten. I thought I could protect you. From it. His voice faltered, but he kept going, the words spilling out before he could stop them. I thought I could protect you from me. Her throat tightened. She didn't know what hurt more, the raw vulnerability in his voice or the truth of what it meant. But she had no time to think about that. A noise sliced through the air. A sharp guttural growl that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Both their heads snapped toward the trees. It was there. The wolf. The first one. The one who had mocked Burr. The massive creature stood between the trees, its eyes glowing with unnatural light, and for a moment, Lyra thought she might be swallowed whole by the weight of its gaze. She had seen wolves in the wild before. But this was not like any wolf she'd ever encountered. It was wrong. It was the curse. The curse that had started with her. The curse that had never let go. Rowan emerged from the shadows behind the beast, his eyes sharp, his posture tense. Do not, Cale warned him, his voice low, strained. But Rowan didn't listen. I'm not here to start a fight, Rowan said, his voice calm, but carrying an undeniable edge. I'm here because it's time. Lyra's breath caught as she looked at both of them, Cale, the man who had once promised her safety, and Rowan, the rebel who had warned her of the truth. The truth that was now standing in front of her. Lyra felt her pulse quicken, the air thick with the tension between the two men, between the history of their shared secrets and the impossible weight of what was about to happen. "You can't stop it, Cale," Rowan said, his gaze flicking toward the beast. "None of us can." Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs as the wolf in the trees moved forward, its massive body flowing through the shadows like liquid night. "Lyra," Cale said softly, his eyes full of something she couldn't quite place. But the words came anyway. "The blood moon, it's not just about power. It's about you. You are the key to everything." The moment those words hit, everything changed. The weight of the night shifted. The moon seemed brighter, the wolf's growl deeper, the air impossibly thicker. And for the first time, Lyra felt it. The awakening. A power that wasn't hers. Not really. It was inside of her, yes, but it wasn't hers alone. Her breath caught in her throat as the world around her seemed to tilt. The curse had always been hers. And the blood moon had come to claim what it was owed. Cale stepped toward her, his expression fierce, desperate, like he had just realized that everything he had done, everything he had been fighting for, was about to fall apart. Rowan's eyes met hers, soft, almost regretful. But when he spoke, his voice was final. "The time has come, Lyra. And now, we see who you really are." Everything was about to break. And this time, nothing could stop it. The moon was full again. But it was different this time. Lyra stood alone in the clearing, her eyes fixed on the sky above. The world was unnaturally still, no rustle of leaves, no chirping of insects. Just the sound of her breath, shallow and uneven, the steady rhythm of her pulse beating louder than it should have. It was as if the night itself was holding its breath. The forest, usually so full of life, was silent. Her hands trembled at her sides, the blood that had once felt like a curse now pulsing beneath her skin, a reminder of something ancient. Something inevitable. The darkness pressed closer, suffocating her, pulling her deeper into the mystery of what she had always been. Not human. Not wolf. But something in between. Something born from both the heavens and the earth. A mistake. Her gaze flicked to the shadows at the edge of the trees. Cale's silhouette was barely visible, his form still and motionless, his eyes locked on her as if he, too, was waiting for something to happen. He was close, yet so far, the space between them charged with the weight of unspoken things. Rowan stood a few paces away, the tension in his posture as palpable as the night itself. His expression was unreadable, his eyes distant, as though he were caught between the desire to protect her and the realization that she was beyond saving. The wolf, the first one, the beast from the forest, moved slowly toward her, its eyes glowing with a predatory gleam. But it didn't come to attack. It came to claim. Lyra took a step back, her heart thudding in her chest. No. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready for any of it. The moonlight bathed her in its cold glow, pulling something deep inside her to the surface. It was as though the sky itself was calling her, coaxing her to accept what she had always been. The blood. The curse. She had never asked for it. But now she could feel it. She could feel the power crawling under her skin, waiting to be unleashed. The beast within her stirred, restless, as though it had been locked away for far too long. Cale moved toward her then, his steps measured, slow, like he was walking through a dream. But when he reached her, he didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes said everything, regret, fear, something close to longing. And in that silence, Lyra realized something. He never wanted me to know. He never wanted me to awaken. Rowan stepped forward as well, his movements fluid, almost effortless. His eyes locked with hers, a quiet understanding passing between them. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice soft but filled with an intensity that made Lyra's breath catch. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Instead, she felt the pull again. The overwhelming pull of the moon. Of the blood. Cale's voice broke the stillness. "You're not ready for this," he said, his tone low, barely above a whisper. But there was something desperate in it, something that made Lyra's heart ache in a way she couldn't explain. "I don't want this," she whispered, her voice shaking. But the truth hung in the air, undeniable. It wasn't up to her. The wolf stepped closer, its massive body filling the space between them, its eyes locked on hers as though it were waiting for something. For her to make a decision. For her to accept what had always been true. Lyra's pulse quickened, her breath shallow. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to run, to escape, but she couldn't. Not anymore. The pull of the moon was too strong. And as the wolf moved closer, Lyra felt the change. It wasn't dramatic. There were no flashes of light, no sudden transformations. It was subtle. Silent. A feeling that grew deeper within her, a coldness that spread through her veins like ice, until she was frozen in place. Her body trembled, not from fear, but from something darker. The curse that had always been part of her was waking up. And it was hungry. Cale stepped back, his eyes filled with something that made Lyra's stomach twist. "Lyra," he said, his voice tight, like it was being dragged from his chest. "You don't have to do this. You can still walk away." But it was too late for that. Rowan was the one who stepped forward this time, his eyes soft but determined. "You are not a weapon," he said, his voice gentle. "You don't have to be what they want you to be." Lyra's heart stuttered in her chest as his words sank in. But even as she tried to hold on to them, something darker rose within her. She wasn't human anymore. And she wasn't wolf. She was something else. A flicker of pain, sharp, sudden, struck through her chest, and she gasped, doubling over as the pain spread through her body. The wolf was waiting. And for the first time, Lyra understood what it wanted. What it needed. Without thinking, she reached out toward the wolf, her hand trembling, blood still dark against her skin. The moment her fingers brushed the fur, everything changed. The pain dissolved in an instant, replaced by something far more primal. Something that rose in her chest like a roaring tide, flooding every inch of her body. Her senses sharpened to a degree she couldn't comprehend. The night around her felt alive, as though she could taste the moonlight in the air, feel every shift in the earth beneath her feet. The beast within her rumbled to life. And as the wolf turned its gaze to her, Lyra knew. She was no longer just Lyra. She was now the one the wolves had always been waiting for. The first of her kind. And she wasn't ready. But it didn't matter. Because the moon had awakened. And so had she. And there would be no going back. If this story pulled you in, don't miss what happens next. Hit subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter of the darkness unfolding in Black Hollow.